They thought the Black Maid would disappear into the background, but one forgotten greeting was about to make an entire Mafia family remember what they had lost. The rain over Busan fell softly against the tall windows of the Kang family estate, turning the city lights into blurred rivers of gold and silver. Inside the mansion, everything carried the weight of tradition. Crystal chandeliers illuminated the grand dining hall, expensive suites filled every corner, and the quiet conversations of powerful guests moved like whispers through the room. Tonight was not an ordinary gathering. It was the birthday celebration of Daniel Kang, the legendary founder of the Kang family, and everyone who mattered in the world of business and influence had come to show their respect. Among them stood Amara Williams, a 27-year-old Black Maid wearing a simple black uniform, holding a tray of tea with steady hands. To most people in the room, she was invisible. She was the person who opened doors, arranged flowers, and quietly stepped aside when important guests walked by. Some guests glanced at her with curiosity. Others barely noticed she was there. Amara had learned that silence was often expected from people like her. But silence did not mean she had nothing to say. She watched everything. She remembered everything. She noticed how Daniel Kang paused whenever he heard old Busan songs playing in the background. She noticed how his eyes softened when he looked at photographs of the city from decades ago. She noticed the small details that others ignored because they were too focused on power and status. Across the room stood Adrian Kang, the youngest leader of the Kang family empire. At 35 years old, he was known for his calm expression and impossible standards. People described him as a man who trusted very few and expected perfection from everyone around him. When his eyes briefly met Amara's, she lowered her gaze respectfully. "Stay in the background tonight," Adrian had told her earlier. "There will be important people here." His words were not cruel. They were simply a reminder of the world she lived in. Amara understood. This night was about the Kang family, not her. She was there to serve, not to be seen. But what nobody knew was that Amara carried a connection to Busan that went far beyond a workplace. Years ago, someone special had taught her the language, the expressions, and the warmth hidden inside the local dialect. She had spent countless evenings practicing every phrase, not because she wanted attention, but because she wanted to honor a memory. As the evening continued, the doors of the mansion opened, and Daniel Kang finally entered the hall. Every conversation stopped. Guests straightened their posture. The atmosphere changed instantly. The old patriarch walked slowly toward his seat, while everyone prepared their formal greetings. One by one, they approached him with carefully chosen words. Then Amara looked up. She saw the expression on Daniel Kang's face, the distance in his eyes, and the loneliness hidden beneath years of success. Before she could stop herself, she stepped forward. The entire room turned toward the Black Maid who had just moved into the center of attention. And then she spoke a greeting in a true Busan dialect that nobody expected to hear. The room fell completely silent. The silence that followed Amara's greeting was heavier than any sound in the room. For a moment, nobody moved. The guests who had been quietly judging her now stared with confusion, trying to understand how a young maid standing at the edge of the hall could speak to Daniel Kang in a Busan dialect so naturally. Daniel Kang remained still beside the entrance, his expression unreadable. The older man had spent decades surrounded by people who wanted something from him. Respect, influence, approval. Everyone who approached him carefully chose their words, hoping to impress the powerful figure before them. But Amara's greeting was different. It was simple. It was warm. It sounded like a memory returning after many years of silence. Daniel slowly turned his attention toward her. "Where did you learn that?" he asked. His voice was calm, but everyone in the room noticed the change. Adrian Kang stood near his father, watching closely. He had seen many people attempt to gain Daniel's favor, but he had never seen anyone catch his father's attention this quickly. Amara lowered her eyes respectfully, still holding the small tray in her hands. "Someone taught me," she answered softly. "Someone who loved Busan very much." The guests exchanged curious looks. They were used to seeing people chase the Kang family's approval through expensive gifts and impressive connections. They were not used to seeing someone offer a small piece of kindness with no expectation in return. Daniel looked at her carefully. "A person who loved Busan," he repeated. Amara nodded. "Yes, sir. She always told me that a place is not remembered because of its buildings or its wealth. It is remembered because of the people who leave their hearts there. The words created another quiet moment. Adrian noticed something unusual. His father, a man known for keeping his emotions hidden, looked almost nostalgic. The room that had felt cold moments earlier suddenly felt different. Amara did not realize the impact of her words. She was only sharing something meaningful that had been passed down to her. She had never expected a simple greeting to become the center of attention. A guest near the table smiled politely, but spoke with a doubtful tone. A dialect can be memorized. Anyone can repeat words after enough practice. Several people looked toward Amara again. The unspoken challenge was clear. They wanted to know if she truly understood the meaning behind the language, or if she had only learned a few phrases. Amara remained calm. She did not try to prove herself. She simply answered with another short sentence in Busan dialect, explaining the feeling behind the greeting rather than just the pronunciation. Daniel's eyes changed instantly. He recognized something that could not be copied easily. It was not just the words. It was the respect behind them. Adrian watched his father take a slow breath, as if remembering a part of life he thought had disappeared forever. For the first time that evening, the people in the mansion stopped seeing Amara as someone who served the family. They began seeing her as someone who carried a story. And Adrian Kang, the man who had spent years believing trust was earned only through power and loyalty, found himself wondering who this quiet maid truly was. The guests remained quiet after Amara's final words, but the silence was no longer filled with doubt. It was filled with curiosity. For years, the Kang family mansion had been a place where people carefully measured every sentence, every movement, and every expression. Tonight, a simple greeting from someone everyone had overlooked had changed the atmosphere completely. Daniel Kang slowly approached the table, his eyes still focused on Amara. The older man had spent much of his life surrounded by people who knew his reputation, but very few people remembered the person behind it. "Tell me about the person who taught you," Daniel said. His voice was softer than before. Amara hesitated for a moment. She was not used to being asked about her own story, especially in a room filled with people who had never considered her important. Her name was Evelyn, Amara explained. She was someone who always carried a piece of Busan with her, no matter where she went. She taught me that language is not just about words. It is about showing respect to the memories and people connected to those words. Daniel listened carefully. The name seemed to bring back a distant memory, but he did not say anything yet. Across the room, Adrian Kang continued watching the conversation. He noticed details that others missed. The way Amara spoke with honesty instead of trying to impress anyone. The way she stood calmly, even with dozens of eyes on her. The way she never once acted like she deserved special attention. It was unusual. Most people who entered his family's world wanted something. Amara seemed different. One of the guests, a businessman who had spent years trying to build a relationship with the Kang family, stepped forward with a polite smile. "It is impressive that you learned the dialect," he said. "But the Kang family has a long history. Knowing a few traditional phrases does not mean understanding the culture." The comment was not openly cruel, but everyone understood the meaning behind it. Amara could have become defensive. She could have tried to explain herself. Instead, she simply nodded. "That is true," she replied. "A few words are not enough. Understanding comes from listening and respecting the people who share them." Daniel looked at her with quiet approval. Her answer was not a challenge. It was humility. It reminded him of the values he had grown up with in Busan many years ago. Before the wealth, before the influence, before people measured worth by reputation. The evening continued, but the guests who once ignored Amara now watched her differently. Adrian noticed his father asking her small questions about Busan, about old traditions, and about the stories she had heard growing up. Each answer showed patience and sincerity. Later, when the crowd moved toward the dining area, Adrian approached her near the hallway. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "You surprised everyone tonight," he finally said. Amara looked slightly uncomfortable. "I did not mean to." Adrian studied her expression. Most people would enjoy the attention. She looked toward the crowded room where everyone was still talking about the unexpected moment. "I only wanted to show respect," she said. That was all. Those simple words stayed with Adrian long after she walked away. Because for the first time in a long time, someone had entered his family's world without trying to take anything from it. She had only brought something back that they had forgotten. The night continued inside the Kang family mansion, but the atmosphere had changed in a way nobody expected. The guests who arrived believing they already understood their place in the world were now quietly watching someone they had barely noticed before. Amara Williams had not demanded attention. She had not tried to impress anyone. Yet somehow, her kindness had become the most memorable moment of the evening. Near the dining hall windows, Kang sat looking over the city lights of Busan. The older man seemed quieter than usual. Kang stood nearby, observing his father with a thoughtful expression. He had spent years watching Daniel handle important decisions, negotiate with powerful people, and maintain control over every situation. But tonight was different. Tonight, his father looked like someone remembering a part of himself that had been left behind. She reminds me of someone, Daniel finally said. Adrian looked at him. Who? Daniel remained silent for a moment before answering. My mother. The simple words carried unexpected weight. Adrian had heard many stories about his grandmother, a woman known for her warmth and strong connection to Busan. But he had rarely heard his father speak about her with such emotion. Daniel looked toward the hallway where Amara was helping prepare the next part of the celebration. That greeting she used, he continued. That was not something people learned from a book. It was something passed down with care. Adrian followed his father's gaze. He remembered the first time he noticed Amara. She had always been quiet, always respectful, always careful not to step into places where she was not invited. He had assumed that meant she lacked confidence. Now he wondered if he had misunderstood her completely. Across the mansion, Amara carefully arranged the final details for the evening. She was aware that people were looking at her differently, but she did not let it change the way she worked. She had never believed kindness was something to perform. It was simply something she carried with her. As she placed a small decoration on the table, Daniel approached her. The guests immediately noticed and became quiet again. The head of the Kang family rarely approached anyone personally, especially someone outside his inner circle. Amara, Daniel said. She turned and bowed respectfully. Yes, sir. He looked at her for a moment before asking, why did you keep this part of yourself hidden? Amara was surprised by the question. I never thought it was something important enough to share, she answered. Daniel studied her response. Most people would have used this opportunity to gain something. Amara gently shook her head. A memory is not valuable because it helps you receive something. It is valuable because it reminds you of someone you care about. The answer stayed with everyone who heard it. Adrian looked away for a moment, processing the words. In his world, people often measured relationships by loyalty, influence, and advantage. But Amara had shown him something different. She had shown that some connections existed without expectation. Later that evening, as the guests continued their conversations, Daniel made a quiet decision. He asked Amara to join the family dinner table instead of remaining with the staff. The room immediately noticed. A position at that table represented more than a seat. It represented recognition. Amara hesitated, unsure if she had heard correctly. Daniel simply smiled. Tonight, you reminded this family of something we should never have forgotten. And for the first time that night, Amara was not standing at the edge of the room. She was finally being seen. The decision from Kang surprised everyone in the dining hall. A place at the family table was not simply a seat. In the Kang family, it represented trust, respect, and acceptance. For years, many powerful people had hoped to receive that recognition, yet that evening, it was offered to someone they had barely noticed. Amara Williams quietly took her place, still unsure how to react to the sudden change. She looked around the table filled with influential guests, family members, and longtime friends of the Kangs. Only a few hours earlier, she had been standing against the wall, expected to remain unseen. Now, she was sitting beside the people who shaped one of the most respected families in Busan. Daniel noticed her hesitation and gave a small, reassuring smile. You do not need to feel uncomfortable, he said. Respect is not something given only to those with wealth or status. Amara nodded, grateful for his kindness. But not everyone at the table shared the same feelings. Some guests exchanged quiet looks. They were not openly disrespectful, but their expressions showed uncertainty. To them, a maid receiving such recognition was difficult to understand. One guest named Charles Bennett, a longtime business partner of the Kang family, leaned back in his chair. It is unusual, he said politely. The younger generation does not always understand tradition. A person can learn words, but true understanding takes years. The room became quiet. Everyone knew the comment was directed toward Amara. She placed her hands calmly together and answered with patience. I agree. Understanding takes time. That is why I always try to listen before I speak. Her response was simple, but it carried confidence. She did not try to defend herself by proving others wrong. She simply showed who she was. Kang watched from across the table. He noticed how different she was from the people he usually met. In his world, many people carefully prepared every sentence because they wanted something in return. Amara spoke because she believed the words mattered. Later, during dinner, Daniel asked her about her memories of Busan. Amara shared small stories about the person who taught her the dialect, about old neighborhood traditions, and about how certain phrases carried emotions that could not be translated easily. Everyone listened quietly. Even those who had doubted her began to understand that she was not trying to imitate a culture. She respected it. After dinner, Adrian found himself standing near the garden entrance where the night air flowed through the open doors. He saw Amara looking at the city lights in the distance. You handled yourself well tonight, he said. Amara turned toward him. Thank you, Mr. Kang. Adrian paused. He was used to people being nervous around him, but Amara looked at him with calm respect rather than fear. Most people would have tried to take advantage of that moment, he said. Having my father's attention. Amara looked back at the lights of Busan. Your father was not giving me an opportunity. He was sharing a memory. Those are different things. Adrian had no immediate answer. Her words stayed with him because they challenged something he had always believed. Maybe value was not always connected to power. Maybe some people carried something far more rare. As the night ended, the guests left the mansion with a different impression of Amara than when they arrived. She was no longer simply the maid who worked inside the Kang estate. She was the person who reminded an entire family of a forgotten piece of their own history. The morning after the unforgettable dinner at the Kang estate arrived quietly, but the memory of the previous night continued to spread throughout the household. The staff spoke in softer voices. The guests who remained at the mansion looked at Amara Williams with new curiosity, and even those who had once ignored her now treated her with a different kind of respect. Amara noticed the change, but she did not allow it to change who she was. She continued preparing the rooms, arranging the flowers, and helping the household run smoothly, just as she always had. To her, kindness was not something to show only when people were watching. It was a choice she made every day. Kang noticed this more than anyone. From his office window overlooking the gardens, he watched Amara greet the staff members, thank everyone who helped her, and quietly solve small problems before they became larger ones. He had spent years surrounded by people who wanted to impress him. They showed confidence, ambition, and carefully planned words. Amara was different. She never seemed to perform for approval. That difference stayed in his thoughts longer than he expected. Later that afternoon, Adrian found her in the library organizing a collection of old books about Busan history. Sunlight entered through the tall windows, creating warm patterns across the wooden floor. You are still studying? Adrian asked. Amara looked up with a small smile. There is always something more to learn. Adrian glanced at the books on the table. You already knew more than most people here. Amara gently closed one of the books. Knowing facts is not the same as understanding people. There is always more behind a story. Adrian remained silent for a moment. Her answer reminded him of something his father had said many years ago. People often looked at the surface and missed the meaning underneath. My father trusts very few people, Adrian finally said. Amara looked at him with curiosity. I know. Do you understand why last night mattered to him? Adrian asked. Amara thought carefully before answering. I think he remembered a part of himself that he thought was gone. The response surprised Adrian. It was exactly what he had been thinking but had not been able to express. Before he could respond, Kang entered. The library. The older man carried a small wooden box, something carefully preserved over many years. He looked at Amara and placed it on the table. I wanted to show you something, Daniel said. Amara looked uncertain but opened the box carefully. Inside was an old photograph of a young woman standing near the coast of Busan, smiling beneath the sunlight. This was my mother, Daniel explained. The person who taught me the importance of remembering where we came from. Amara looked at the photograph with quiet emotion. She immediately recognized the warmth in the expression, the same warmth she had heard in Daniel's voice when he spoke about Busan. She sounds like someone who cared deeply about people, Amara said. Daniel smiled. She believed everyone had a story worth hearing. Adrian watched the exchange quietly. For years, He had known his father as a strong leader who carried responsibility for the family. But now he saw another side of him, a side connected to memories and emotions that had been hidden for years. As Amara returned the photograph carefully, Adrian realized something important. The reason his father respected her was not because she knew a dialect or remembered traditions. It was because she saw the person behind the reputation. And for the first time, Adrian began to see that too. The days following the dinner at the Kang estate brought a quiet transformation that even the household staff could feel. Nothing had officially changed, no announcement had been made, and yet the way people looked at Amara Williams was different. The whispers that once followed her were replaced by conversations filled with curiosity and respect. She was still the same person who carefully prepared the rooms every morning, who thanked every worker by name, and who noticed the smallest details others overlooked. But now, people understood there was much more behind her quiet presence. Inside the main hall, preparations were underway for a private family gathering. Kang had invited a few longtime family friends to discuss future plans for the estate, and Adrian Kang was expected to take the lead. As usual, the room was filled with confident voices and experienced opinions. Amara entered only to deliver documents, but she immediately noticed tension among the guests. A discussion about preserving old Busan traditions had become focused only on business value and public image. Several people believed traditions mattered only if they could strengthen the family name. Amara quietly placed the documents on the table and prepared to leave. Before she could step away, Daniel spoke. "Amara, what do you think?" The question surprised everyone, including her. A few guests exchanged uncertain looks. They were not expecting the opinion of someone who worked in the household to be requested during such an important conversation. Amara hesitated. "I do not know if my opinion is needed, sir." Daniel smiled gently. Sometimes the people who stand outside the conversation notice what those inside it miss. Amara looked around the room before answering. "I think traditions survive because people feel connected to them. If something only exists to make a family look impressive, people eventually stop caring about it." The room became quiet. Adrian watched the reactions around him. He saw some people considering her words for the first time. They had spent years discussing how to preserve the Kang family image, but perhaps they had forgotten the meaning behind it. One guest, a woman named Victoria Hayes, looked surprised. "That is a thoughtful perspective," she admitted. Amara simply nodded. "I learned that from the people who shared their stories with me." After the meeting ended, Adrian walked with Amara through the garden path behind the mansion. The evening air was cool, and the lights from the estate reflected softly across the stone walkway. "You realize you changed the entire conversation today," Adrian said. Amara looked at him. "I only answered a question." Adrian gave a small smile. Most people would have used that moment to make themselves important. Amara looked toward the garden. Being heard is different from being important. Sometimes people just need someone to listen. Adrian had no response. Her words continued to challenge the way he viewed the world. For years, he had believed influence came from position, reputation, and control. Amara reminded him that influence could also come from understanding. Later that evening, Daniel gathered the family and made a decision that surprised everyone. He announced that Amara would be included in future cultural events hosted by the Kang family, not as an employee, but as someone whose perspective was valued. The room remained silent for a moment. Then Adrian stepped forward and supported his father's decision. It was the first time he had openly acknowledged Amara's place among them. And as Amara looked around the room, she realized something had changed. She had not gained respect by demanding it. She had earned it by remaining true to herself. The following week, the Kang family estate prepared for one of its most important cultural gatherings of the year. Unlike the private dinner where everything had changed, this event would bring together business leaders, longtime family friends, and respected figures from across Busan. For generations, the gathering had represented the connection between the Kang family and the traditions they valued. This year, however, everyone noticed one unexpected difference. Amara Williams was no longer standing quietly at the edge of the room. She was invited to participate. The decision created conversations before the event even began. Some people welcomed the idea, while others struggled to understand it. They had known Amara as a maid for years, and they could not easily accept that someone they once overlooked now had a place among important guests. Amara heard the whispers, but she remained calm. She had never expected everyone to understand her immediately. She only hoped they would see her intentions. Inside the grand reception hall, Kang watched as guests arrived. He noticed how some people looked at Amara with uncertainty, waiting for her to make a mistake. It bothered him more than he expected. Before meeting her, he would have ignored those opinions. But now, he recognized something unfair in the way they judged someone without knowing her story. As the evening began, one guest approached Amara with a polite smile. It must feel unusual to be included in an event like this, the woman said. Her words sounded friendly, but the meaning behind them was clear. Amara smiled gently. It is a little different, but I am grateful to be here. The woman nodded and walked away, perhaps expecting Amara to feel uncomfortable. Instead, Amara continued greeting people with the same kindness she had always shown. Later, during a discussion about preserving Busan traditions, a disagreement began among the guests. Some believed younger generations no longer cared about old customs. Others believed traditions needed to change to survive. Kang listened quietly before turning toward Amara. What do you think? Once again, the room became silent. Amara looked surprised but answered honestly. I think traditions are like stories. If people only protect the words but forget the feelings behind them, the story slowly loses its meaning. Daniel smiled. Adrian looked around the room and saw something shift. People were not simply listening because Daniel had asked her to speak. They were listening because her words carried sincerity. Then someone questioned whether her connection to Busan was truly meaningful. The person did not insult her, but the doubt was clear. Before Amara could respond, Adrian stepped forward. Her understanding of this family has been shown more clearly than many people who have known us for years. The room became quiet. It was the first time Adrian had publicly supported someone outside his immediate circle. Amara looked at him with surprise. Adrian continued calmly. Respect should not depend on someone's position. It should depend on their character. Daniel watched his son with a proud expression. He knew this moment was not only about Amara. It was about Adrian learning something important about leadership. A true leader did not only protect a reputation. A true leader recognized value wherever it appeared. At the end of the evening, Amara stood near the garden doors looking at the lights of Busan. Adrian joined her quietly. You changed this family more than you realize, he said. Amara smiled softly. I did not change anyone. I only reminded them of something they already knew. Adrian looked toward the city and understood that was exactly why she was different. She did not seek power. She simply brought out the humanity people had forgotten. Months passed after the evening when Amara Williams first stepped into the Kang family spotlight, but the memory of that night remained a turning point for everyone who had witnessed it. The Kang estate was still the same grand home overlooking the lights of Busan, but the atmosphere inside had changed completely. What was once a place built around reputation and tradition had slowly become a place where people listened, shared, and remembered the importance of connection. Amara never tried to become someone different. She continued waking early, helping the household, and treating every person around her with the same kindness she had shown from the beginning. The difference was that now people noticed. They saw the patience behind her actions, the respect in her words, and the quiet strength that had always been there. Kang often invited her to family gatherings, not because of what she could do for the Kang name, but because he valued her perspective. She reminded him of a time when relationships were built through sincerity rather than appearances. Kang had changed the most. The man who once believed trust was something earned only through loyalty and results had learned that people could reveal their value in unexpected ways. He respected Amara not because she impressed powerful guests or connected with his father. He respected her because she remained genuine even when nobody was paying attention. One evening, Adrian found Amara in the garden where she often went to enjoy the quiet moments after a busy day. The city lights of Busan stretched across the horizon, reflecting softly against the night sky. You know, Adrian said, standing beside her, when you first arrived here, I thought you would only be another person passing through this house. Amara smiled slightly. Many people thought that. Adrian looked toward the garden. I was wrong. The simple admission meant more than a long explanation ever could. Amara turned toward him. Everyone has a story. Sometimes people just need someone willing to listen. Adrian nodded. He understood now. The greatest changes in life were not always created through power or influence. Sometimes they came from a single moment of kindness that reminded people who they truly were. Later that week, Daniel gathered the family and announced a new tradition for the Kang estate. Every year, they would host a cultural evening where people could share stories, memories, and traditions from different backgrounds. He explained that the future of the family would not be built by protecting the past alone. It would be built by understanding it. Amara stood quietly as everyone welcomed the idea. She never expected to become part of a family known across Busan. She never expected her voice to be heard in rooms where she once stood silently. But she had learned something important. A person's worth was never decided by their position, their background, or the assumptions others made about them. It was revealed through the kindness they carried and the way they treated others. As the evening ended, Daniel looked toward Amara with gratitude. Adrian stood nearby, no longer seeing her as someone who belonged on the outside. She was part of the story of the Kang family now. Not because she changed who she was, but because she reminded everyone else of what they had forgotten. And beneath the lights of Busan, the quiet voice that once went unnoticed had become the voice that brought an entire family closer together.